Hello and welcome. You're watching BIZWORLD Weekly, a show where we bring you the top stories of the week from across the world. Let's start with the market check. Indian equity indices ended on a positive note with Sensex up 0.44 points at 81,904.7 points and Nifty up 0.43% at 25,114 points. On sectoral front, auto, pharma, metal and telecom added 0.5 to 1%, while realty, FMCG, media and PSU Bank ended lower. Bharat Electronics, Bajaj Finance, Shriram Finance, Hindalco and Bajaj Finserv were among the top gainers on Nifty, while top losers were HUL, Wipro, Trent, Eternal and Bajaj Auto. BSE mid-cap and small-cap indices were trading flat. Indian rupee ended 17 paise higher at 88.27 per dollar on 12th of September. This week has been chaotic. There were protests around the world from Nepal to France. People were on the streets protesting. First, let's talk about Nepal's Gen Z protests. This week, Nepal witnessed a one-of-a-kind protest led by the Gen Z. And when a protest is led by the Gen Z, what do you expect? Reels, memes and more? But this time it was different. Let's get into the whole picture here. Nepal's government was not stable for a long time now. It has had 15 governments in 17 years. Inflation is soaring and corruption is everywhere. The youth say that the protests were all about corruption, but the trigger was a social media ban. But why? The youth are frustrated with lack of jobs and sight of no future. So they started exposing Nepo kids, children of top politicians and Democrats, who are showing off their luxury lives on social media while the young in Nepal face unemployment, are forced to leave the country. In Nepal, the unemployment rate is at 12.6%, which is even higher in the youth. In the age group of 15 to 29 years, it is at 20%. More than 700,000 people have left the country in FY24. Over 65,000 people left the country every month in 2024. 33% of Nepal's GDP comes from personal remittances, which is a big concern. So the Gen Z started exposing the Nepo kids, and then came in the social media ban. All apps including Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, X all were banned because they failed to comply with the deadline to register locally, appoint grievance handlers and remove flagged content. But the timing was bad. The Gen Z opposed this ban and even raised concerns of nepotism and corruption and even lack of accountability of governance. The protests were peaceful until around 19 protesters were killed, some even in their school uniforms. The protests escalated and that led to the resignation of top ministers. Even the Prime Minister KP Oli had to resign. The parliament building, homes of top ministers were all burnt. Now the situation is better with the army declaring curfew until last night. Now new pictures have come out where the protesters are cleaning the mess that they had created. But the uncertainty still looms. The protesters have now turned against each other. The issue? The choosing of an interim prime minister who will bring Nepal out of this crisis. Gen Z are divided between three candidates. The president said that he will be trying to fulfill all of these demands but asked the protesters to stay patient. But they are divided. One group of protesters are pushing for Sushila Karki to lead Nepal for now. She is the former chief justice and has no connection with any political party as of now. Another group is pushing for Kulman Ghesing. He is the former managing director of Nepal's electricity authority. He is clean, a political technocrat, and was forefront in ending Nepal's long-running power crisis. And the last contender is Balen Shah. He is the mayor of Kathmandu and a rapper turned politician. Now, Sushila Karki, some protesters are saying that she's too old to bring a change. She is 73. Balain Shah has backed out. He says that he does not want the position, so Kulmangar Singh remains. Well, we'll see to who is going to take up this position, but for now, the uncertainty still looms, but the protesters are quiet. Now, from one protest to another, France is witnessing a block everything protest. Its president, Emmanuel Macron, has had many problems. He is on to his 7th prime minister since 2017. The last prime minister, Francois Bayrou, was ousted in a no-confidence vote called by MPs from both extremes. So a new prime minister, Sébastien Lecornu, has now taken up the seat. He is a Macron loyalist. France's streets were then filled with protesters. The protesters blocked highways, piled garbage cans into barricades, blocking everything. Mass arrests also took place. Over 250 people were arrested. This is a deja vu situation for France from 2018. The trigger was political turmoil. Bayrou was ousted after he tried to push through 38 billion in budget cuts, including slashing pensions, squeezing public spending. But why? Because France has a massive debt crisis. Its national debt is at 114% of the GDP and the budget deficit is at 5.8% of its GDP. Its debt at $3,900 billion. Bayrou's aim was to reduce this debt, but the parliament was against it. Both the left and right united and took away his seat. Macron was swift to announce the next prime minister. Critics say that Macron was not learning anything from his past. Instead of reaching out to the opposition, he appointed another loyalist. Now the protesters blame Macron. Calls for his resignation is also growing. In 2024, Macron called a snap election as he thought that it would give in clearer centrist mandate. He got enough to stay in power with outside support. But the parliament now has a clearer set of three. The right-wing National Rally, a left-wing bloc that is highly active in protest, and a weakened centre led by Macron that constantly needs issue-based support from others. Economically too, apart from the debt situation, it is not very good. On September 18, labour unions plan to join the nationwide strikes over the budget cuts, and now the new Prime Minister has a bigger challenge. It is to present a budget without getting ousted by a no-confidence vote and trigger a massive rally against the government. The government reportedly plans to cut spending by 44 billion euros to tackle the national debt, but a budget cut would mean more protests because salaries and pensions is where it would fall. So, will the third Prime Minister of France in just 1 year be able to save his seat, or it will lead to more protests and France's search for its fourth Prime Minister in a year? We'll see. August has delivered a new set of economic challenges for the United States, and the Federal Reserve now finds itself at one of the most difficult crossroads in recent years. The CPI, or Consumer Price Index, most widely watched measure of inflation, has jumped 0.4% in August alone. That may sound modest, but it represents the sharpest monthly increase since January. On a yearly basis, inflation is now running at 2.9%, the fastest pace in more than 6 months. And when you strip out the food and energy categories that tend to swing wildly, the so-called core inflation rate is still stuck at 3.1%. That's more than a full percent point above the Fed's official target. Digging into the details, the biggest contributors are the costs that hit consumers directly. Gasoline prices climbed nearly 2% in just 1 month. Grocery bills got heavier too, with tomatoes, apples and beef leading the increases, and anyone booking a trip felt the pinch. Airfares jumped almost 6%, while hotel rates rose more than 2%. Now, these increases are being driven by lingering supply chain disruptions, the labor shortages, and businesses passing along high costs that are partly the result of tariffs and ongoing trade tensions in the US. But while the prices are heating up, the job market is cooling down. Weekly unemployment claims rose by 27,000, hitting 263,000, the highest level in nearly 4 years. Hiring has also slowed dramatically. In August, the economy only added 22,000 jobs, well below the forecast and a steep drop compared to earlier this year. Now, the unemployment rate has edged up to 4.3%, its highest since late 2021. And broader measures of underemployment, which capture people working part-time or discouraged from looking for work, also has ticked higher. Now, economists warn that these may be early signs of a labor market losing momentum, with the risk of more layoffs on the horizon. Now, that leaves the Federal Reserve with a dilemma. On one hand, the inflation is still running too hot, and on the other, the labor market is starting to crack. Normally, high inflation argues for tighter policy, rising or holding the interest rates high to slow the demand. But rising unemployment and weaker growth argue for the opposite, cutting rates to provide relief. At their upcoming policy meeting in mid-September, Fed officials are widely expected to begin an easing cycle, lowering the benchmark interest rate from around 4.3% to 4.1%. It would be a modest move, but symbolically important one. The first step towards loosening the monetary policy after a long stretch of keeping the conditions tight. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell has also been cautious with his messaging. Earlier, he acknowledged that there is a need to support jobs, but he also insists that inflation is not yet fully under control. Fitch Ratings has also sounded an alarm on America's outlook, projecting subdued GDP growth for FY26. Now, the agency cites risks from trade disruptions, geopolitical uncertainty, and persistent inflation, all factors that could dampen investment and slow the pace of recovery. In other words, the US economy is walking a tightrope. Inflation is proving stickier than expected. The job market, once the strongest pillar of recovery, is now showing cracks, and the Federal Reserve must decide not only whether to act but how quickly and how forcefully. The coming months will be pivotal. The stakes are high, not just for Wall Street but for Main Street households coping with rising prices, uncertain job prospects, and the ripple effects of the Fed policy decisions. In the past few months, US is struggling with one thing, keeping its allies closer, and the recent example is its ties with South Korea. In a recent ICE raid at Georgia battery plant of Hyundai and LG, over 400 people were detained, out of which over 300 were from South Korea. Now, they were all skilled workers who had come to the plant to set it up and transfer technology. But they were all detained, and after an agreement with South Korea, now they can fly back to their homeland. But Trump, being a deal maker, reportedly gave them an option: stay in the United States and teach Americans how to do the job, or go back to South Korea. Sadly for Trump, only one of them had decided to stay back. South Korea is now preparing to get all of them back to their homeland, but the president of South Korea now has said that this would scare companies to invest in America, and they would rethink if America is still a safe investment option. But were they all illegally working at the plant? Our next report tells you more.
In a dramatic and unprecedented move, federal agents last week raided the Hyundai LG battery plant construction site in Elabel, Georgia, a facility once hailed as a landmark for U.S.-South Korea economic relations. At dawn, Homeland Security and ICE officers swept through the sprawling complex, leading more than 1,400 workers into interviews. By nightfall, 475 workers were detained, including over 300 South Koreans, mostly technical experts and subcontractors brought in for critical infrastructure and equipment setup. The investigation revealed many detainees had entered on ESTA visa waivers or B-1 business visas, neither of which permit labor or hands-on technical work. Among those held were dozens of LG Energy Solutions staff, and hundreds employed by affiliated Korean companies. The raid sent shockwaves through Georgia's economy, stalled construction at the $7.6 billion factory, and raised diplomatic tensions with Seoul. For some detainees, visa statuses were unclear, but the underlying issue was a pattern of relying on short-term travel documents for specialized roles, exacerbated by difficulties in securing U.S. work permits. Faced with the crisis, South Korea sprang into action, denouncing the deep regret over the detentions and pushing for swift release. Over the weekend, an agreement was reached. The South Korean government chartered a Boeing 747-8I, scheduled to fly from Incheon to Atlanta, to repatriate its nationals under a voluntary departure process, allowing them to avoid formal deportation records. It's one of Korea's largest evacuation missions since COVID, underscoring the urgency with which Seoul moved to protect its citizens and restore diplomatic trust. As these workers prepare to depart, South Korea's president and foreign minister are actively negotiating with Washington on both immediate repatriation and long-term visa policy fixes. Industry officials back home warn this episode has exposed major risk points in future U.S. investment projects and cross-border technical exchanges. Back in the United States, President Donald Trump addressed the incident by urging foreign firms to legally bring very smart people, welcoming technical expertise and investment if immigration laws are strictly followed. Trump called for global companies to train American workers overtime, signaling even tighter scrutiny on foreign labor as factories ramp up in critical industries.
A major legal showdown is underway in Washington. Trump has been using tariffs as a weapon to get what he wants from the world, be it in investments, political agendas, or anything. But his tariffs are now facing legal heat in the US itself. Donald Trump's sweeping reciprocal tariffs are now headed to the US Supreme Court after a federal appeals court ruled that President had overstepped his authority. And on August 29, judges struck down much of Trump's trade policy, saying that the International Emergencies Economic Power Act, or IEEPA, does not give presidents the power to impose broad tariffs on America's trading partners. In other words, the Congress never authorized what Trump has been doing, and Trump immediately took to Truth Social, blasting what he called radical left group of judges. He warned that without tariffs, quote, the America would be completely destroyed and its military power instantly will be obliterated. For Trump, this fight is not just economic, it is political and central to his agenda. The case is now fast-tracked to the Supreme Court with oral arguments set for November. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that the stakes could not be higher. If the court rules against Trump's tariffs, the Treasury would be forced to refund nearly half of all tariff collections. A staggering sum, potentially could be more than $100 to $210 billion. Bessent warns that this would be terrible for the Treasury and could cripple America's negotiating power abroad. Already, US businesses have paid over $210 billion in tariffs till August 24th. If refunds are ordered, companies may get their money back, but the government would lose revenue and future trade leverage could collapse. And that's not all. Trump has warned that US may have to unwind or even reverse trade agreements with the European Union, Japan, and South Korea if the court strikes down his tariffs, because those deals were built on assumption that America's tariff authority would hold. Now, Trump claims that EU deal alone could be worth nearly $1 trillion. Trade analysts say that the fallout would be massive, not just losing revenue but lost trust also. Now, without tariff power, the US could be weaker on global stage. The Treasury could face higher borrowing needs, adding pressure on deficit, inflation, and the domestic economy. So the choice before the Supreme Court is stuck: uphold Trump's tariffs and cement broad presidential power over trade, or strike down and the US would face refunds and economic upheaval, unraveling the key trade deals. Now, this battle isn't just about tariffs, it's about executive power, America's fiscal future, and countries' place in global trade. The court's decision, expected later this year, could redefine US's economic policy for decades to come. For decades, Pakistan's economic strategy has been simple. Keep one hand on the begging bowl and the other signing loan agreements. IMF, Gulf monarchies, Asian lenders, China, you name it, Islamabad has borrowed from it. The plan? Plug the deficit, survive another crisis and repeat. Reform and growth? Well, that's for another day. But in 2025, something extraordinary happened. Pakistan's iron brother China decided it might want its money back. The crown jewel of CPEC, or China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the $7 billion mainline one railway, was supposed to transform Pakistan's railways. Instead, it's turned into a case study in how not to run a mega project. Islamabad begged Beijing to cover 85% of the $10 billion bill. Beijing said no. Pakistan slashed costs to $6.7 billion. Beijing still said no. Eventually, even offers of cheaper loans did not move the Chinese. And so, the most strategically important project of CPEC is now crawling forward with piecemeal loans from the Asian Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Each dollar tied to endless feasibility checks, conditions and delays. Because of course, when you have run out of your brother's patience, you turn to the neighborhood banker and hope that he doesn't notice your credit history. Spoiler alert, they noticed. And China's hesitation isn't just about railways. Pakistan already owes Beijing billions from earlier CPEC projects. Power producers alone are waiting on more than $1.5 billion in unpaid bills. Add attacks on Chinese nationals in Pakistan and you can see why Beijing is now treating Islamabad less like a brother and more like that cousin who never pays back his loans. The Gulf states, well, they have mastered the art of polite indifference, sending short-term deposits and oil deferments, but not long-term lifelines. And Pakistan's answer? Bet all on Reko Dig, the giant copper gold mine in Balochistan. Projected revenues someday, hopefully, maybe will pay off today's $130 billion public debt. Except even here, Islamabad needed the ADB's first mining loan in 40 years, plus guarantees from US and Japan. Nothing screams confidence like begging multiple guarantors for a single project. India, unsurprisingly, isn't amused. New Delhi has argued for years that these bailouts bankroll instability, including terrorist groups targeting India. But global lenders, it seems, are slow learners. 7 years after the grand unveiling, the ML1 railway still hasn't left the station. CPEC, the supposed game changer, is now a warning label for anyone tempted to finance Pakistan's borrow, spend, struggle and borrow again model. The real question is no longer who will bail out Pakistan next, but how much longer can this economic juggling act last before the entire system collapses under its own weight. While China is pulling out from Pakistan, guess who is cozying up with the country? It's the US. A major $500 million critical minerals deal has been cracked between the US firm and Pakistan. Well, makes sense. US wants to get critical minerals from outside China and Pakistan apparently is its best bet. But most of these critical minerals are in Balochistan. So will the US get what it wants? Our next report tells you.
The United States has strengthened its economic partnership with Pakistan by signing a landmark $500 million deal to develop the country's mineral sector. Missouri-based U.S. Strategic Metals, which specializes in critical minerals production and recycling, has partnered with Pakistan's Frontier Works organization, the largest miner in the country. Together, they plan to build a state-of-the-art polymetallic refinery aimed at boosting supply chains, creating jobs, and expanding the mining industry. This agreement comes shortly after a broader US-Pakistan trade pact, which Islamabad hopes will attract more foreign investment into its vast mineral and oil reserves. According to Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, the partnership will focus on increasing processing capacity, establishing value-added facilities, and launching large mining projects. The first exports will include antimony, copper, gold, tungsten, and rare earth elements, tapping into minerals that are crucial for modern technologies. The U.S. Embassy has praised the deal as a significant step in improving relations between the two countries. The deal could provide much-needed relief to its ongoing financial crisis by reducing reliance on foreign loans and boosting exports. However, most of these reserves are located in Balochistan, a conflict-hit province where insurgency, violence, and political instability create major hurdles. To make the region safer for investment, the U.S. has designated local militant groups as terrorist organizations, aiming to combat unrest and secure mining operations. Meanwhile, China's presence in the region is shrinking. For years, Chinese investments under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor dominated the area, but repeated attacks on Chinese projects and workers have forced Beijing to pull back, highlighting the risks of operating in volatile zones. For the United States, access to these critical minerals is vital for high-tech manufacturing, energy security, and reducing dependency on Chinese supply chains. Yet the challenges are significant. Without addressing security concerns, governance issues, and local resistance, even well-funded projects could struggle. Success will depend not just on the minerals or geopolitics, but also on how foreign investors engage with local communities and navigate regulatory complexities.
Big changes have arrived for Indian citizens seeking US visas. As of September 6, 2025, the US State Department has ended the decades-long practice of third country stamping. What does that mean? Well, Indian applicants for visas like F1 student, B1, B2 visitor, H1B or O1 visas now must attend interviews exclusively in their home country unless they qualify for very specific exemptions. Until now, many Indians avoided long waits at home country by traveling abroad to places like Thailand, Germany or Mexico for quicker visa appointments. That option is now closed. Any new appointment must be scheduled only in the home country of citizenship or legal residence. And beware, if you are mistakenly booking in another country, the non-refundable visa fee is lost. Existing international appointments are likely to be honored, but all the new ones must follow the new rules. Now, the changes don't stop here. From September 2nd, 2025, nearly all US visa applicants, including your senior citizens and frequent travelers, are required to attend in-person interviews. Pandemic-era waivers and Dropbox renewals are almost gone. And with US consulate wait times in India already stretching beyond a year in some cities, the process has just gotten very harder. For thousands of students, professionals and families, travel plans and job timelines are about to become far more complicated now. On top of this, Washington is weighing new visa duration caps. Student visas may be limited to just 4 years. Media professionals could be capped at 240 days. Enforcement is also getting very tight. In 2025 alone, over 6,000 student visas have been revoked, most linked to overstays or criminal violations. Deportations of Indian nationals are also rising from an average of 3 per day under President Biden to 8 per day this year under Trump. That's 1,703 removals in just 7 months. So what does all of this mean for Indian applicants? Longer waits, lesser flexibility and greater risk of losing money or even the status if procedures aren't followed precisely. HR teams and students will now need to plan their further travel in advance, sometimes a full year ahead. And for those applying outside their home country, strong proof of residency is essential. In short, the US visa process is entering into a new era. Stricter rules, fewer shortcuts, and tougher enforcement. For Indian travelers, students, and professionals, the message is clear. Early planning is no longer optional, it is for survival. For our last story of the week, former UK President Boris Johnson is back in the news. Everyone in the US is waiting for the release of Epstein files, but the UK seem to have released what it calls Boris Files. Well, it's not the same. The Boris Files has documents that reveals that Johnson had misused his contacts made during his tenure as the Prime Minister of UK to make big money. What are these files? Who has released them, and what is in it? Our next report tells you more.
A massive leak, known as the Boris Files, has put former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson under intense scrutiny, exposing a trove of documents about his activities since leaving office in September 2022. Over 1,800 leaked files reveal how Johnson may have exploited contacts made during his premiership for personal profit, casting doubts over the ethical boundaries maintained by British government officials. The files include emails, contracts, and records showing Johnson's involvement in lobbying foreign governments, notably Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. In February 2024, Johnson met Saudi officials to promote Better Earth, a consultancy he co-chairs, aiming to play a key advisory role in Saudi Arabia's climate strategy ahead of COP30. Shareholders in Better Earth include close allies from Johnson's political circle, raising further concerns about conflicts of interest. Another major revelation centers on Johnson's meeting with Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro. Documents show that Johnson received a £240,000 payment from a hedge fund manager whose company had signed a contract with him just weeks prior, despite Johnson's public claims of not being paid for the meeting. Leaks also highlight the overlap between Johnson's taxpayer-funded staff and his private commercial interests. Since leaving office, Johnson has claimed £182,000 under the Public Duty Costs Allowance, money supposed to fund former Prime Minister's public duties. However, evidence suggests this staff also handled Johnson's commercial engagements, which critics say amounts to misuse of public funds. Johnson's global speaking career has been extremely lucrative, earning him about £5.1 million for 34 events, often accompanied by luxury travel and accommodations. While paid speeches are not uncommon, strict rules prohibit former ministers from lobbying governments they interacted with while in office. Rules Johnson was reportedly reminded about upon his departure. The Boris Files also revisit accusations against Johnson for breaking COVID lockdown rules, documenting multiple unauthorized gatherings at Downing Street and Johnson's official residence. Both previously known and newly revealed events suggest repeated breaches, reigniting public outcry over leadership accountability. The fallout has been swift, with opposition parties demanding a full investigation and suspension of Johnson's public allowance until the allegations are resolved. Critics assert that Johnson's actions may violate revolving door rules, meant to prevent officials from cashing in on government contacts immediately after leaving office.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.